Well, first of all, my name is Ron Carrico. This is Bob Wright, and the idea, we just want to talk about your history. We can't talk about all of it because we only have an hour and a half to 2 hours. There's too many darn things to talk about. But if we'd like, I'd like to concentrate on the aviation stuff. To start off with, I'm really curious of the B-24. That is such an interesting story.
Yeah.
And most people have never heard before. And then the other thing is the whole. Is the word Nisei, or how do you say it?
That means the second generation in Japanese.
Yeah, I know. Did I say it right? Nisei?
Yeah, it's pronounced Nisei.
And Sansei is third generation.
Right.
And the first generation is
Issei.
Issei. Okay. So I'd like to talk about that a lot too, because I think that's. I saw the play Allegiance, which you didn't see, so you should have. You would. Yeah. I think you would have enjoyed it. I read quite a bit about the experience, on Wikipedia, and I think we've talked about. I talked to our archivist yesterday, and she said the museums sort of like to share these experiences between themselves, and so what could be here could be used for another museum as well. So, what do you have here?
I just have a laptop that I loaded some pictures of the internment camp.
Oh, really?
And this fort in which I was stationed once, Maginot Line.
Right. It's
called Fort, not Belvedere, Fort.
Well, here, let's go ahead and start then, and I'll just first I want to show you something. You'll find this interesting.
Oh yeah, there's that B-24.
Well, apparently they had 3 of them, and this is probably the one you saw.
That's a B-17.
No, up down below.
Oh.
And the Germans had 3 of these. And when this one was found, it was in Austria, in Salzburg, Austria. Which is probably fairly close to where you were, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, we were near, we were close to Turin, Italy.
It's just right across the mountain.
Right.
It's not that far. So, well, let me make an adjustment here. And do this a little bit forward. Okay, so I'll take that, and I'm just going to start asking questions, and I just want to ask brief questions, and I want you just to answer as much as you can think of. So, auto power off, what does that mean? What does that mean? Come on, camera. Why did it do that? It just turned itself off.
You got a ground power?
Well, it's got power. It's right here. I have 2 cameras. The other one's running, so. Oh, I know why I did it. We were just talking too long. That's why I did it. Okay, now I'll push the button over here.
There's a red light up there that
it's going on. Okay, today is November the 15th, 2012. My name is Ron Carrico. We're at the San Diego Air and Space Museum, and today we're going to interview Mr. Katagiri, who is a survivor of World War II, and he has some interesting stories to tell. And like I just told him, I'm sure he has a million stories to tell. But we're just going to concentrate on a couple things here today. Why don't you tell us your full name?
I'm David Katagiri.
And where were you born?
I'm born in Seattle, Washington.
And where at?
Seattle, Washington.
Okay.
My parents came from northern Japan.
When did they come?
My father came about 1917.
And what was his profession?
He was a laborer in the farm, a dairy farm.
Okay, and do you know why he came here?
I believe he never really made much mention of it, but I believe it was primarily a situation where he was from a military family in Japan, most of whom were in in the World War II era family, in which there were quite a number of high-ranking Japanese, I guess you'd call them generals, and one admiral.
So he came here. Then what year were you born?
I was born in 1925.
Okay, and so let's skip forward to one of the things I think is most fascinating. You went into the military. We'll get to how you went into the military in a minute. But at one point in your military career, you were in southern France, or northern Italy, actually.
No, it's actually southern France,
Okay.
along the Maginot Line.
Okay. Do you remember the name of the town?
Sospel.
And what was the reason you were there?
Well, we were stationed there for a short time just to get our unit replenished again with a replacement from the United States. And my unit was involved in the saving of the 36th Division battalion, which got cut off and surrounded by Germans.
This was the famous Lost Battalion.
Yes.
And so after that, then you were there to replenish the unit. You weren't actually involved in the Lost Battalion.
No, I wasn't.
Okay. And so what was it that you saw that was so interesting?
I was in Fort, I think it was called Barbonnais. It's a French name. And it was the southernmost large fort of the Maginot Line. I guess there's no way to directly connect to that.
No, there isn't. No. So while you were there, so was there something going on? Was there a...
Well, it was just a case where the unit was... we were a segregated unit, and as a result of losing so many in the unit, they had to wait until new soldiers came in to replenish the regiment.
So, but what was it you saw though that was so interesting?
Oh, well, we often went up on the top side of this fort, and the Germans, we could see through the artillery binoculars. They'd be out sunning themselves while we were doing the same thing. And they didn't want to have any live action either, any more than we did.
And when was this?
This would have been about January 1944. Excuse me, 45.
Okay. So January sometime 45.
Yeah.
4 or 5 months before the war ends.
Yeah, the war ended April.
Okay.
At least in Italy.
So what happened?
Well, we were out one day just killing time up on top of this fort, which had a pair of 72 millimeter German, I guess they were French guns, which were part of the old-fashioned Maginot Line. And we heard this roar of a multi-engine aircraft, but we kept looking, didn't see it. And all of a sudden it would pop up on the German side of the ridge of the Maritime Alps.
Mm-hmm.
And then I could see the thing make a hard bank turn and go down the length of the ridge. And as it did so, it dropped cargo parachutes. And the old-timers I was with had been barraged many times by the German artillery that was over on the Italian side. So when they saw the replenishment of the unit dropping cargo chutes, to him that just meant in about another half an hour they're going to start shelling us on the French side. So they told us we better go down under this fort where we were, which was a safe place to be when it was being barraged.
What kind of airplane was it?
It was a B-24 Martin, and I know for sure that it was the Martin B-24 because I was of the age at that time when all the high school shops were asked to make identification models, and one of the models I made was the B-24. Most easily identified with the round verticals.
So, I'm sorry, you were in high school and the high school shops were making models of the airplanes?
Yes, but that was before I entered service.
Yeah.
It's about the last thing I did when I was in high school.
How many times did you see the airplane?
He came almost regularly. We can almost predict when they were going to arrive. So several times I was up by myself with a long-range artillery binocular, and I knew that it was coming, and it would take maybe 10 seconds before he would suddenly appear above the ridge line and doing its cargo.
What happened finally? Was there an engagement that drove the Germans back, or why did he stop coming?
Not at that place. We were being replenished with enough strength for us to return to Italy as requested by General Mark Clark. So we went into the Leghorn or Livorno harbor as a total unit, fully manned.
Well, I'll show you this picture I just showed you a minute ago, and this is after the war. There was a lot of airplanes, a lot of a lot of American airplanes, British airplanes, French airplanes that the Germans had captured one way or another. Mm-hmm. And amongst those pictures was, if I can get it on the screen here, is this picture of a B-24, the tail of a B-24, and it's black and white here, but it was actually brown in color, and it was captured after the war at I see it here somewhere, Salzburg, Austria. So this is apparently what you saw flying that day, or those days.
I had strong binoculars sufficient to be able to identify the swastika on it, but I don't remember seeing it at that time.
Yeah. This one was a very dark brown. There's another picture of in a book here. I'm going to show the screen. It's the one in the middle, the brown one in the middle with the initials KB on the side, and of course it has a yellow bottom, which you probably couldn't have seen from a distance.
No.
But apparently they painted the bottom as the airplane's yellow.
At a distance, it appeared to be flat black to me, but then again it was far away, and most likely if it were painted any kind of like a brown, it would appear black.
Well, I think that's just a fascinating story, because I've never heard anybody ever seen one of these things.
I remember seeing that B-24 at least 4 times, and they were always doing the same thing and always flew the same route.
Well, let's go back and talk about the whole Nisei experience. Where were you living when the war started?
South of Seattle, and at that time my parents were developing a nursery of plants, mm-hmm. which included about 2 acres of greenhouses, which had quite a number of different plants. It included poinsettias and the Christmas, and then approaching Easter, it would be Easter lilies.
And so you were 16 at the start of the war?
Yeah.
So you were in high school at the time?
Yes.
Sophomore, junior, something like that. So when the Japanese launched their attack on Pearl Harbor,
Mm-hmm.
what was your feeling about that and everybody else's feeling in the community?
Well, being only 15, 16-year-old, it didn't really strike the way it did the elders. Of course, it meant in their mind it was going to be a situation where we would be probably oppressed. And sure enough, shortly, probably a year after Pearl Harbor, the government posted a lot of signs along the neighborhood, telephone poles, and being of a rather obedient society, the Japanese just up and moved like we were told. And basically they told us to just bring anything that you could carry. So
you had to report to certain places then?
Yeah, so what happened was we were asked to go on our own, of all things, to the Renton, Washington train station. And like I said, we were an obedient society, was just got ourselves over to the train station and boarded a train. And the thing that really saddened me was some of my Caucasian best friends said they would see me off, but they never arrived. And the most unlikely neighbor, who was almost, we thought at the time, before this order came, that they didn't like the Japanese. It turned out these people were from, I believe they were from Sweden. They operated a dairy farm next door to where we were, which was a nursery farm.
What, two questions. First question, did you know anybody in Hawaii at the time?
No, I did not.
Because I don't think they interned anybody in Hawaii, did they?
There were a few who were picked up probably not more than about 2 or 3 days following Pearl Harbor, and it simply meant to us that they were being monitored all that time.
And then the other thing is the property that your parents owned, that was taken from them?
Essentially, we just had to literally pack up and carry as much as we could and leave.
But then did the U.S. government become the owners of the property then?
No, we were leasing the property at the time, so the owners took it over, and at that time we had a full harvest of hothouse tomatoes. And I still remember that when I took the harvested tomatoes to the marketplace, it cost like 25 cents a pound, which it's almost the same as today. Pound of tomatoes, you know.
So when was the harvest sold, that you were able to take money then to?
We could not, because there was no time, and my father knew that the owner of the property wanted to harvest the tomatoes and cash out, and it turned out that our Swedish people were so kind to us, and they offered to store as much as they could in their basement of our goods. And so things like, which we could not sell, In fact, there were many people who would come around and bang on our door asking us, do you have something to sell?
When so you got on the train in Renton, Washington.
Well,
Did you
yes.
know where did you know where you're going?
No.
Not at all.
No. We just knew that we were going to be incarcerated someplace.
And where
Anyway, as it turned out, we ended up in a temporary boot camp in just outside of Fresno, California. So to suffer summertime in Fresno, coming from the northwest, which is a mild climate, all the old folks really suffered.
How long are you there?
Approximately I think it was about 2.5 to 3 months. And all we did there was just wait until our permanent internment camp was finished, and that was up in Tule Lake, California. One of the many internment camps that were prepared.
How many were there?
All total, I think there were 8 or 9 camps. Tule Lake just happened to be one of them.
But you didn't stay at Tule Lake, though. You went
Yeah,
someplace
we
else.
went to Tule Lake, and as it turned out, our family got split up because the government wanted to have certain people who were located in different zones to go to different locations. So my sister was a nurse in Columbus Hospital in Seattle, and another sister was a housemaid in a place called Bellevue, Washington.
Mm-hmm.
So we were separated at the time, and they wanted to get back to the family, but the Army, who was now in charge, told us that no, you can't do that. You just have to go as directed, and they will do the same. And then later on, we were given a chance to get our families back together.
So where were you sent, though?
I ended up in this Tule Lake, and I still had a year to go and to finish high school. So I actually graduated from high school in Tule Lake.
And your parents were there, too?
Yes.
Okay. And so now that you graduated from high school then in 1940?
43.
43. Okay, so 1943 comes around, and about that time, apparently, they started forming some Japanese units from Hawaii.
Yes.
And that would be the 100th.
Originally it was the 100th Battalion with the Japanese American volunteers.
Where does the term one puka puka come from?
Oh, that Hawaiian in puka means 0.
Okay.
So one puka puka was 100.
Okay, great. So now after the, so somewhere along the line, I guess the one puka puka performed very well.
Yeah, they were assigned to just out of Anzio.
And now, somewhere along the line, there was a decision made to allow Japanese Americans to join the Army.
Either drafted or to volunteer.
And there was a loyalty oath that was sent out, correct?
Yes.
And you remember, of course, seeing the loyalty oath, I suppose. I mean, you got it yourself. I mean, you
Yes,
were
I had to go to a certain room in the internment camp wherein the resident there was a rather bored-looking Army colonel, and his job was just to read the oath, and we either said yes or no.
Well, apparently there was questions, question 27 and 28. Do you recall those?
Yes. One was, will you renounce your any contact with the Japanese imperial country, and you know,
I think that was question 28, and then number 27 was, are you willing to serve in the armed forces of the United States on combat duty, wherever ordered?
Yes.
And so if a lot of people signed yes, and a lot of people signed no. And
yeah, and Tule Lake turned out to be the location where all of these young men who said no to the question on those loyalty oaths ended up being brought over to one section of the Tule Lake camp. And it was given a higher, what do you call it? Had a higher ranking security system in place.
So I hope you weren't in that section.
No, I answered yes, which is what would allow the Selective Service to draft us.
So now you would have been, say, June of 43. You would have been 17, 18? 18, I guess.
Yes, I just turned 18.
So now I understand that they took so many people from the mainland, but there weren't almost 75% of the people were willing to enlist in the U.S. Army.
Yes.
So how did you actually enlist then?
Oh, the Selective Service had a separate office near where this colonel gave the loyalty oath, and if we were a yes type individual, that allowed the Selective Service to brand us as 1A.
Oh, great.
Whereas before that, it was a 4C. And the 4C, you look on the back of the Selective Service card and it says enemy alien.
Oh. So when was it that you were actually you went off to the Army?
Well, it was kind of a circuitous route because first what happened was the Army decided to use many of the forts to hold new enlistees, either volunteer or draftees, in certain camps. And then at that point they were given a choice of, let me back up a moment. There was a time when they actually allowed anyone to leave the secured area on the West Coast. And there were many cases where entire families would just load up their farm truck as much as they could and headed off eastward, not knowing where they're going to go.
When was that?
Well, that was at the beginning of the internment.
So they were allowed to leave?
Yes. So there were cases where quite a number of individuals and families moved to, that I'm familiar with, was Moses Lake, Washington, quite a number of places in Oregon and Idaho.
So why were they allowed to leave? Just because they get far away from the coast, or what was the...
Yeah, just to get us out of the zone that was assigned secure by, there was a General DeWitt who had the responsibility of security all along the West Coast.
Well, so what were the internment camps like? I mean, Tule Lake is not exactly the most wonderful spot in the world.
It's kind of a bare Army boot camp. If anybody has trained in one of those, you'll know what it was.
How many people were there?
In our camp, there were like, I think, close to 10,000. We had the largest camp, Tule Lake.
So all in all, you spent how much time there? About a year?
Our family remained interned for 18 months.
Okay, but you weren't there the whole time, though. You left before they did.
Yes.
And so, when you left, where did you go?
There were hostels and essentially employment agencies set up by the Japanese people who helped to place either students or people who had a confirmed employment offer.
Well, so your father would have been 45, 50 years old. He was
A little older than that. I think he was close to 50.
Where did he go?
Well, we were together. It was my father, my mother, me, and my elder sister and her 2 daughters.
I mean, I'm talking about after the war.
After the war.
When they were released from the internment camp.
Because
you weren't there when they were released, right?
Yeah.
Well, you were.
The war was still going on when we were released.
Okay, so you were released, but then, I mean, they must have went to wherever they went. Well, you went off to the Army.
Yeah, what happened there was I knew I was going to be enlisted, and I went to work at the Curtis Candy Company, Gentleman Farms, and I think they established these farms for many of the companies that got a tax break for the amount of money that they spent establishing the farms. So the Curtis Candy Company had soybean farms, they had cattle, dairy farms.
And where was this?
This is all in northern Illinois.
Oh, I see. Okay. So now when you went into the service, though, where did you go into the service?
Oh, I went straight to Fort Sheridan.
And Fort Sheridan's in Florida?
No, it's in Illinois. Let me find what I'm looking for here. Is my wife still out there with my notebooks? I had a couple.
Stuff in your.
Oh, okay. It's sitting right on my lap.
It's right here. Just got it.
I found them.
So what was the nearest town to Fort Sheridan, Illinois? I've never heard of Fort Sheridan before.
Well, I suppose it's Libertyville, Illinois, or Wheeling, Illinois.
Okay. And you had Japanese officers as well as...
There were very few Japanese officers. All the non-coms tended to be, were second generation like I was. Here we go.
So basically everybody spoke English.
Yes. This is a group that was gathered in Fort Sheridan, Illinois.
Let me show this up to the camera here.
And I was in that group. And I had to wait 2 months for that many enlistees and volunteers to gather.
Really? It took that long for them to...
Yeah, well, most of us were 18, just turned draftable age. So either they got drafted, actually I was inducted, and there were a number of volunteers in this group. But I was shuttling back and forth. I was one of the first ones to arrive at Fort Sheridan. First thing they did, told me, well, go home and wait until we call you again.
So what would that picture was taken when?
That would have been 44.
So,
Early, wait a minute, that can't be. I think whoever wrote this note on here had an error. I went in September of 43. And from there, we were shipped down to Camp Blanding, Florida for basic training. And there were many other instances where groups like this went to different camps.
So what did you train as? What was, when you train in the Army, you train, after basic training, you have a particular specialty. What did you get into?
In our group, we were all trained to be expert riflemen.
Okay.
And anyone who was ranked as an expert rifleman also had an automatic invite to become a sniper.
Really?
And I thought about that myself. I had one of the highest scores with the M1, and I had actually I had the opportunity to become a sniper. And a sniper is used as Springfield, both actions, Springfield with a scope.
Mm-hmm.
The Germans had something similar, which is a Mauser rifle.
Right, right. Doesn't seem very fair to be a sniper to me. It doesn't.
That's why I did not go in as a sniper.
It just doesn't seem right.
I just felt that, well, you're gonna get somebody unaware and probably kill the guy without he knowing who did it.
Yeah. When you read about stories about these Marines that have killed 100, 150, Al-Qaeda people or whatever, and it just.
I didn't think I could live with the thought that I'm killing basic innocent people who didn't know what the hell is going on.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so when did you? So you trained as an infantryman, and now, what was the name of the unit that you went into from there? Or the number? I guess I should say the number.
It was I don't even remember now. It's 220 something.
Well, I'm looking at some numbers here. There was the 442nd RCT.
Those are the lasting organizations that picked up all those trainees from the camps, basic training camps.
And then did the 100th, where was the 100th Infantry Battalion at this time?
Well, the 100th is, majority were volunteers from Hawaii.
Were they in Europe at that time?
Yes, they had just gotten done fighting with the 34th Division.
Okay, so that was in
Southern France.
Excuse
me. We ended up in southern France, but the actual combat, they started the combat down in just outside of Anzio.
Oh, okay, in Italy.
Yeah, in southern Italy.
So, of the 100th Infantry Battalion, if someone was in that at the very start, they were in combat for 2 years or so.
Yes.
Wasn't it from
what I gathered from talking to the old timers who started in southern Italy, they were you have to excuse me, but my mind goes blank once in a while. I'm on a oxycodone pain pill, and it just blasts my memory.
Well, I see that there was. Okay. Say I'm reading here that the 100th finally joined and was taken into the 442nd, and that's what you were in, the 442nd.
Yes, I was in Fox Company, 442nd.
And then it also included said they had an anti-tank company, a cannon company, and a service company, a medical detachment, and a band.
Yeah, I think this is the first organization that basically was modeled as Rangers, completely independent. We had our own artillery, our own, like you said, a medical corps, and then we had, I believe they're engineers. Forgot what group they were.
232nd Engineer Company,
Yeah,
it says. So it was a completely self-contained unit.
yes.
And everybody's Japanese, but there had to be some, I'm sure there was some.
Well, there were a number of, originally there were a number of officers who were Caucasian.
Did they stay with it forever, or?
Yep. I think probably they were given a chance to go to some other unit, but most of them decided to stay with the organization.
Did you know any of them?
No.
Just being a lowly enlisted guy,
Yeah.
you probably wouldn't.
Wearing an M1 and not really knowing what else I was supposed to do.
So
I have to mention that during this period when we were in basic training, in I believe it was the 9th week or about the 9th week out of a 17-week basic training. One morning the local general called us all out, and he stood up there on the platform and announced to us that we'll probably be shipping out. And it turns out that the 442 had suffered such losses saving the lost battalion that they pulled them off the line after the battalion was saved.
Now, I'm not that familiar with France, but where was the Lost Battalion? Do you remember the name of it?
Lost Battalion is up in northern France, in the Vosges Mountains.
And they just got cut off, and so the
36th Division was fighting along the frontier of the combat units, and somehow it's mountainous and hilly, and chances are they simply advanced from hill to hill and found themselves out by themselves, and the Germans then suddenly trapped them.
So it was decided that a Japanese unit would go to represent.
Well, at first I think there were 2 attempts for the 36th Division platoons to get in there and try to save them, but they were all forced back. And then the 36th Division General decided to order the 442nd and the 100th in to save the group, basically 1 battalion.
So, and then that's where there was a lot of casualties.
That's why I got rushed out of basic training. I didn't really finish basic training, but they says, well, you men have learned how to operate all the infantry small arms. So beyond that, I guess it was just simulated combat out in the palmettos in Florida. So they said, well, you're going to be shipped out. Then I spent probably a miserable 1 month on a English ship, the Lusitania, which is a sister ship of the Aquitania, but the other way around. Lusitania is the one that got sunk.
Mm-hmm.
And so we boarded in New Jersey and crossed the Atlantic in the midst of all the submarines that were going around, German submarines that were raising havoc with troop ships.
I'm just reading here what it says in this. It says, Lost Battalion was cut off by German troops, and they dug in till help arrived. And it says, at 4 a.m. on Friday, October 27th, General John Dalquith ordered the 442 to move out and rescue the cut-off battalion. The 442nd had the support of 522nd and field artillery units, so forth and so on. So, but you were after they suffered tremendous casualties apparently.
Yeah, it was a bloodbath, and towards the final assault by the 442, I think some of the men up at the very front got so damn tired of seeing his buddies getting killed that somebody up on the front just decided to hell with it, and he just got up and started spraying the area with a Browning automatic rifle. And some of the guys actually carried a 30 caliber light machine gun, and they actually held that thing, according to the reports I heard, in a leather strap, because normally they're supposed to be on a bipod on the ground. So when they got up and start rushing the Germans in the final assault to free the lost battalion, one of the guys was awarded the Medal of Honor.
Well, there were more Medal of Honors awarded to
2021.
Yeah, more than any other unit in the military. Well, I'm reading here, just to kind of clarify it, it says, the drive continued on November 17th. They finally pulled back. The 100 had fielded 1,432 men a year earlier, but now down to 239 infantrymen, 21 officers. And then it goes on to say, you know, how many riflemen were killed and so forth.
Yeah, the I Company of the 442 lost so many that there was a time when they're almost ready to give up and leave the front line because they got decimated by, actually they're just running into the M42 German machine guns.
So then now,
so there was a famous group that made the final assault, were referred to as the Samurai Soldiers.
mm-hmm.
You have to excuse me, I live in my voice.
This was the group that charged the hill, were the Samurai Soldiers.
Yeah.
Was that the unit that was yelling bonsai as they ran up the hill?
Right. and the guy who was doing that was
what does bonsai mean?
hurrah,
Hurrah! Oh.
basically.
So now, that was all finished in November, early December, and so the 442nd went south.
Yeah, to
which
this
is where,
Fort Bourbonnais.
which is where you joined up.
Right.
Okay. Boy, it must have been something for all you brand new, fresh-faced guys to get there. All these grizzled veterans who are about 6 months older than you, or maybe a year older. Well, actually, most of them were Hawaiian. At that time, they were mostly Hawaiians, weren't they?
Yeah, this is the southernmost fortification in the Maginot Line, and it's located here at the southernmost. Here's Italy and France, southern France, and Menton is the main place where they cater to the Japanese American soldiers. But most of the time, the men chose to go to Nice, France for their leaves.
So you got there, and when the unit was just kind of recuperating or rebuilding that, and so let's see, this would have been, you must have gotten there around January the 1st or so.
It was in the winter. I can't remember exactly when it was.
Not too bad a winter down there, though, I suppose.
It was still pretty miserable. Getting down there from, we got off in Glasgow, Scotland, from this English troop ship, ended up going all the way south to Southampton, boarded an LST, and got pounded in crossing the remainder of the channel there.
Wow.
And it was miserable. It was just miserable.
And then how, did you just walk down to southern France then, or were there trains? Or?
No, we went all the way across France in a 40 and 8 boxcar.
Really?
And you know, it was supposed to have been 40 men or 8 horses.
Oh. So you had 100 men and
Yeah. Anyway, this is the...
Is that the way it looks today, or?
Yeah, it's still like that. What it is now is a museum.
And it's in the town in France that it's nearest?
Well, it's probably 10 miles to the French-Italian border.
And so now, is this where you were?
Yeah.
This is where you were established to, and you watched the
Yeah,
Germans across the valley.
Yes. See this opening here?
Right.
What that is a open part of the fort. So the Germans were trying like heck to drop their artillery shells in this hole here. But they had, this is a turret. I believe it was like about a 72 millimeter turret gun.
Now, when you were here a few weeks ago, you left a picture of some people standing.
Yeah, those are.
That's where that is, right?
Yeah, it would have been. I can't really tell where it was now, but that picture is the looking southward from that fort, and that's where most of us used to go, topside from the fort. It was a 3-story depth of basically all slots in the fort wall, or the smaller weapons up on top with probably about a 72 millimeter cannon.
So this is pretty much at the time of the war when the Germans were probably going back, and they weren't quite as offensive as they had been, I presume.
No. And anyway, Mark Clark got our entire unit to go back to Italy. They had left Italy to go up to northern France.
Right.
And they turned around and sent them back to Italy again under the request of Mark Clark, General Mark Clark.
So you got there just in time to leave, pretty much.
Yeah, almost.
Were you involved in actual combat there, or you just?
We used to go on patrols, and a couple of guys actually got shot on the patrols. Our patrols met the German patrols, so most of the combat occurring there was away from the forts.
So small arms fire, and
yeah,
until everybody gets tired of it, I suppose, or how do
yeah,
engagements
and the
like
Germans being more sensible than the others manning these forts. Puerto Ricans were to our left flank, and they couldn't leave quiet alone. And they would insist on raising small arms firefights all the time, and I don't know why they did that, because nobody was bothering them.
So did you actually in these firefights come face to face with Germans yourself?
Only the groups that were on patrol that actually made contact.
Did you ever
And
talk to
I
any?
personally did not
You didn't capture any Germans or like that?
No, but there were times when I remember while we were still in that fort, quite a number of German PWs were processed here in this fort.
And now, was it all Japanese Americans that were manning the fort then?
Yeah.
Well, they must have been surprised to see Japanese Americans.
In fact, there's a joke about how our guys would tell the Germans that, I guess your officers didn't tell you, but Japan lost the war, and they got us to fight for the Americans. They believed it too.
Oh, I believe. Yeah, why not? I mean, they were just kids too, right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. So, what did they do with the PWs?
Oh, they were sent back into Marseille, France. I'm not sure where they went from there.
So you just saw them. You didn't deal with them yourself. Then.
No.
But after the war, so how long were you there in that place in France, or at the fort there?
Probably about a month and a half.
And so when you left, it would have been February, March?
Yeah, because we entered combat on this Gothic line in Italy on April 5th.
Mm-hmm.
That I remember for sure. It was April 5th.
No, I'm not familiar with the term the Gothic line.
Oh.
I think it's here it is. Here.
This, incidentally, is the dark rectangle you saw on the top of that fort.
Right.
That's what this place is.
Well, that's a relic, isn't it, of the past?
Yeah.
I mean, I can tell by the card that was taken pretty recently.
Yeah. Well, I can't seem to find it now, but anyway, this probably has that same picture that you. Here's one of the turrets for that fort.
Wow.
And here's the same picture that you got.
That's the same picture I saw there.
So we were up here.
So where was it that now? This is the spot where you would see the B-24.
Somewhere around here. When we were here, we could hear the B-24 rumbling along, and suddenly they would appear up above the ridge line, and they made a hard right turn.
So that's got to be a mile away or half a mile away, something like that.
Yeah, but they flew all the way along here, and when they were approximately halfway down this ridge, they dropped all the cargo chutes.
And then all of a sudden the artillery would start.
Yeah. They got their rations for the week.
So the Gothic line was a...
Wait, I didn't get to it yet.
I'm just reading out loud here. It says, Albert Kesselring directed the construction of the Gothic line along the top of the Alpines.
Yeah, this was the final fortification built by they call themselves the TOLT organization. They're Italians, rooted by they were enlisted by the Germans. And the Germans put them through hard labor to make all the, what do they call it, the bunkers. And
it says using 13,000 Italian slave laborers. They drilled at a solid rock to make gun pits and trenches,
yep,
which they reinforced with concrete.
It was all along this ridge line here, which is the Gothic line.
So this is where. So General Mark Clark welcomed the 442 and presented his plan to break the Gothic line.
Right.
Oh boy.
Because this line had been pretty much survived. I think they said it was 6 separate attacks until the 442 came, and the tactic that our officers played was they got them see, when is it? We started marching about 11 o'clock on 4th, April 4th, and climbed a 3,000-foot mountain in the dark. And then when it was probably about 8 o'clock or thereabouts in the morning, it finally made contact with the Germans who were occupying this ridge line.
So who put that plan together?
Primarily our officers.
The Japanese American officers?
No. I think there's one Japanese American, but as I understand it, he was in engineering group.
It says, I'm just reading, it says that there was 2,300 machine gun nests with interlocking fire. And they gave code names to different mountaintops.
Yeah, they had names like
Monte Charchio, Monte Altissimo, Monte Belvedere, Monte Folgo.
Yes.
Oh, there's one right there. Yeah, Folgorito. But it said that they climbed the mountain early in the morning, just like you said, when it was dark. And then they, at 5 o'clock in the morning, they struck. But apparently it took quite a while. It says the Nisei drove so hard that began on April 17th that the Germans decided to destroy their fortifications and pull back. So it sounds like about a 10-day battle that went on there.
Basically, it was over in less than 2 hours.
Really? At least the part you were in, apparently. Yeah. So what was your memories of that? Tell us about your experience there.
Well, the first contact is when you stumble into a fortification of Germans who were, actually I guess they were sleeping. We caught them sleeping. That's how our group was able to overwhelm the Germans, and they were quick to give up.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, that was lucky. So you captured a bunch of Germans. This is on the 3rd or 4th, 5th of April.
Yeah.
And then what?
I don't know where they went, but eventually we ended up seeing them again in Gothic, Italy. And it turned out that our unit was assigned by the, I don't know whether it was Mark Clark or someone, who was a higher ranking American general who gave us the job of processing all the Germans. And there were 80,000 German PWs.
80,000? There were 80,000 Germans left in northern Italy.
Yep.
Whoa.
And they came, it's amazing, they came in all sorts of different confiscated Italian cars, bicycles, motorcycles, and if you can imagine a really unbelievable sight is having American MPs regarding the these MPs would direct the traffic, and there were a number of traffic jams where those who were driving were Italian refugees, German soldiers who were giving up, and of all things, the Germans had released a bunch of what do they call them? Mongolian labor force that the Germans had. They looked, it was funny in a way, because while we were processing the Germans, these Mongolian laborers would see us, and they we'd look back at them and they'd recognize that we're Asian.
Wow. I wonder what...
That was in a place called Gedi.
That's in northern Italy.
Yeah, Gheit something or other. Getty.
Let me stop this for 1 second here
Yeah.
and change. I gotta
Yeah, I'm sorry, but my voice gave out again. Well, you've gotten quite an education just getting ready to do this interview.
Oh, it's all on Wikipedia. It's just all a big article on Wikipedia.
Yeah, it's amazing how much stuff there's.
Well, it's hardly like you have to go to a library anymore. In fact, you know, they're building a new downtown library, and I kind of go, why?
Yeah.
It's a book museum, you know.
This is.
Hold on 1 sec. Okay, we're back on.
Yeah, this is a citation for a guy named Yukio Okutsu. He was a staff sergeant, platoon leader, and I was in his platoon for a while until I got reassigned. But this is the well-named mountain called Belvedere. I don't know whether it's mentioned in the records, but
Captured by the first platoon.
this is where we witnessed this guy here doing a charge by himself against 4 M42 German machine guns and a bunch of guys that had Burt guns. And fortunately, he didn't even get wounded.
Well, he got the Medal of Honor, though.
Yeah. Yeah, Yukio Okutsu was one of the many who got Medal of Honor upgraded from Distinguished Service Cross.
So let's move ahead. I know you're probably getting tired. So
Yeah, I'm
2
losing
hours
my
is
voice.
2 hours is a long time to talk about anything. So after the Battle of the Gothic Line, you left and went down to Getty, and then to
Well, it was there were still guys who got killed on the way north.
Well, did you after you got to the top? What did you do? Did you chase the Germans down? Is that what happened then, or
Well,
did you go after them?
keep intercepting the retreating German forces, and ended up doing a lot of firefighting all the way going further north. And basically, as I understand it, most of the Germans were captured or killed before they got to a town in Italy called Aula.
And
That's basically where the first units in Italy gave up to the American forces.
so when they gave up, what was it like? Did you ever talk to any of them? And I mean, because you spoke English obviously perfectly, so and a lot of Germans speak English.
I spoke to a number of officers, and the thing that I asked them was, we witnessed an American B-24 dropping cargo supplies in along the Maritime Alps, and this one German who was being asked at the time didn't know about B-24s. So he apparently did not witness or didn't have any knowledge of what that was.
But did they? I'm just wondering if it seems like after so many years of battle, I mean, the people you were probably fighting with were approximately your age.
Yeah.
And they'd been in the war for 3 years probably or more. I'm just wondering if they were completely worn out or...
Yeah, I think they were. Because after the Gothic line, going north from there, they would fall back to different locations. And most of them were good defense points. And we had a number of reports of killed in action. So quite a number of our guys ended up in firefights. And from where I was, we captured this town called I can't.
Those are beautiful pictures you have here.
Yeah, and then many years later, the Italians decided to honor those who liberated them.
Mm-hmm.
Here are the names of the 21 Medal of Honor recipients.
What did the what did the Italians when you must have talked to Italians quite a bit?
Oh yeah, in fact, we had a number of Italians assigned as guides to make the first climb.
So now the war is over. Let's say it's now it's May the 9th or 10th or something like that, and
yeah. So what do? The Italians asked us to do a victory march.
oh wow!
This is in Leghorn, Italy.
Here, let me show the camera. Here's a picture there. Looking very professional. So now this is the time after this is when you start rounding up all the Germans, or is that about the same time?
Actually, what happened was some of our groups went north and ended up as far north as Alexandria, and actually going back north to the north. Actually, it was the northwest, and along the way there were stories about how these German infantrymen would come crashing out of the bushes. They almost got themselves killed, you know, because we thought that they would be attacking us. It turns out they were just looking for somebody to give up to.
Yeah,
the last few days, it's kind of a sad thing, but even after the Germans actually gave up, well, I can't find it now. The Italians honored the 442 by putting up this monument. Actually, from where this picture was taken.
Where did the term "go for broke" come from? I know that's
Hawaiian.
Oh, that's Hawaiian.
Yeah, I think they had the chance to design and call out the. Actually, it was the regimental cry, if you would.
Right.
And there's actually a song that was written.
You know, I think
incidentally, I've always liked airplanes, and I was always being a model builder.
Oh wow! What a beautiful model.
Yeah, it's a
P-47.
P-40.
P-40. I'm sorry. And that's a very good-looking David Katagiri at the age of 18. So this is one where you.
Just after we left the camp and ended up in Libertyville, Illinois.
It says, family of 6 in a group of relocated Japanese Americans who are raising chickens at the old Arlington Country Club has tried frequently to become an aviation cadet. His hobby is building model airplanes.
Well, what I suspected and what I didn't really face up to was the fact that like I signed up and took the test for the Navy V-12 program.
Right.
And of course, of all those who took the test in this little town called Arlington Heights in Illinois, turned out that I didn't. Anyway, what happened was they put out an announcement at the local high school for volunteers to go to this V-12 program.
Right.
And I went there and took the test along with the American kids who were in Arlington Heights. And unfortunately, I think what happened was, even though I passed the test, and actually I got one of the highest scores of those who took the test, but they didn't enlist me because they knew that I was destined to go to a segregated unit.
Well, there was one Japanese-American pilot that flew in the South Pacific, I think. You probably know who I'm talking about.
There's a guy who is now the veteran commander for the group in Seattle.
Right.
He was a Phantom pilot and fought with Duke Cunningham.
Oh, well, that's later. No, I think there was one Japanese American who fought in World War II that flew.
Oh.
There might have been two. There might have been one guy that was a navigator that was in Europe, and I think there was one Japanese American, which I don't know how that happened, because it seemed like they wanted to keep the Japanese Americans.
Well, there was a guy in Kent, Washington, near where we had our farm. One day he shows up putting around the local area there with a J3 Cub.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, you can buy a brand one in those days for $999.
Wow.
And he would land in the cow pasture behind where we were living.
Mm-hmm.
And he used that as a means of transportation to go from the sawmill where he worked up in the forest. And I guess he took off from a pasture over there and ended up in a pasture behind our house. And the last I heard, the guy's name was Max Marotani. He was a flight trainer for some group in I think it was Texas. Then I think it turned out about the same time that we had to go join the unit. He was told to drop what he was doing, and they sent him up to this recruitment of Japanese Americans.
Mm-hmm.
And here this guy is a flight trainer.
Oh, there you go. Well, that was good. Well, okay, now so so the war ends. Where were you when you found out the war in Europe was over?
In the hospital.
The hospital?
Yeah, I didn't quite make it to the end of the time when they had the...
So what got you in the hospital?
I was standing upright out of my foxhole when the captain told us we're going to move forward, so get ready. And then the Germans dropped a 81 millimeter mortar, which landed about 50 feet in front of us.
Oh, wow.
So that blew me down the hill, and I didn't really realize that I had been splattered with shrapnel. But one of them got me in the chest, one of them got me in the thigh, and I think the mortar is made of cast iron, so when they explode, they just form all sorts of bad little pieces,
Mm-hmm.
about pea size. Anyway, I ended up in the Leghorn Hospital.
So how long were you there?
A while. That's the reason why I got such a bad back now.
Oh, really? Well, so after you got out, then that's when you were helping to round up the Germans at the end of the war. Then.
Yeah.
And when did you come home?
Well, there was a go-home point system, and it turned out that I didn't have enough points, so I had to spend another year.
Oh, really?
So I stayed in Italy, and to keep us out of trouble, which was a concept of theirs, they told us that we could go to these different centers called university training centers.
Mm-hmm.
So, of all things, I ended up signing up, and 3 out of our company were selected, and I got to be one of the lucky ones. Ended up 6 months in Florence, Italy.
Wow, nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
I took physics and in another course that they offered that was part like chemistry, but Galileo's laboratory was right behind us.
So now so when you came home, then that's when you went to.
No, this is before I came home.
Yeah, before, but then afterwards, did that help what you get into college when you got home then?
Yeah, I went to University of Illinois, got a degree in aeromechanical, and was hired by Boeing 1940, the hell was it then? 45, 46.
Well, no.
And that's how I ended up working on the B-52.
Well, but I mean, when you graduated from college, I mean, you had to have graduated like 49 or 50, right?
Yeah.
So then when you, and then you get hired by Boeing, 51, 50, 49, somewhere in that area?
I think it's 50, 53.
So you want to talk about the YB-52?
Quick, I don't know what my wife is doing, but she's about ready to.
Well, just give us a quick sketch what you did.
The YB-52?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I went in as a new employee when the YB-52 and the XB-52 groups were being formed. And I ended up in a group that was, they call themselves the Neudraulics. They took care of hydraulic and pneumatic plumbing.
Mm-hmm.
And the early versions of the 52 were actually powered by bleed air from the engines.
Oh, God.
And it ran
what a
little
nightmare.
Little turbines, air turbines that ran hydraulic pumps, and 240 kVA worth of 400 megahertz AC power.
I flew the C-130 for several years,
Uh-huh.
and there's two really big problems you can have with the C-130. One, propeller, getting out of sync or starting to fluctuate over half a degree. You have to shut it down. And the other thing was bleed air problems. I mean, bleed air problems cause wings to fall off. So the worst thing you can have, as far as we were concerned, is a problem with bleed air. And then to hear you say that YB-52 was powering things with bleed air, I'm going, oh God.
You can imagine an engineering trade study compared a hydraulic system, 3,000 psi, and by the time you got the pumps driving the oil back to the horizontal jack screw, it was probably like about 1.25 inch diameter hydraulic plumbing.
Yeah.
The damn stainless steel pipes were probably 4 or 5 main pipes going from the wheel wells on the 52 and going all the way back to the tail gunner's station.
It's just
And then somewhere along the way, the hierarchy in the Air Force and Boeing decided to retrofit those units with Sunstrand power units on the engine itself.
hydraulic pumps, you mean?
They did both hydraulic and electrical power.
Wow. That can you believe it? It's 60 years ago. They're still flying them.
Yeah, I go down to the Miramar Air Base when they have the air show.
Right.
And one time I went over there, I engaged these crew members in conversation. They had no idea what the history was on the 52.
No.
So I promptly gave them a little stand up just description of the program as it emerged.
Yeah. It's amazing. So the first flight was in 53, 54, wasn't it?
Yeah, somewhere back there.
Yeah, jeez, and they're still flying them.
And those airplanes, the B-52A, no, excuse me, the XB and the YB, both had pneumatic power units. And it wasn't until number 5 airplane crashed at Castle Air Force Base, California.
They finally got rid of all that.
Yeah, they decided they better do something about getting rid of all the pneumatic units, because what happened is Thompson Products made one electrical power unit that blew up, and it's right in the hellhole behind the navigator station, behind the pressurized section of the airplane.
Did you stay working with the B-52?
Huh?
Did you pretty much stay working with the B-52 for your career then, or I mean?
Well, from there I went through all kinds of different programs, and along with the 52 is the air launched cruise missile.
Oh, right, right.
It's AGM 86 Baker B.
Yeah. Well, you've done a lot.
Yeah, 3,000 mile range turbo. It's turbine driven.
When did you retire?
Huh?
When did you retire?
Oh, when did I retire? Kind of burned out. Let's see.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. Why don't we call it right here? How's that?
Oh, okay.
And if this has been a fascinating.
But I have had assignments with Titan Corp and a small company, International Systems, here in San Diego, and I found myself assigned to design a small cruise missile. It was it carried a Navy. Carried a Navy, I can't even remember the name, Standard Missile Warhead, which is a 200-pound fragmenting yeah, it was about 200-pound cylindrical warhead, and it fit right in the well of the space allotted for the originally it was the smallest nuclear warhead.
200 pounds? 200 pounds? Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, let me turn this off here.
Okay.
I think you've had enough, and I've had enough.
Well, I lost my voice, which I was afraid I was going to do.
Well, that's the trouble. That's one of the troubles of these interviews. They start going for a long time, and your mind becomes mush. After a while, everything runs together. But obviously, you could probably talk to us for hours on several subjects. Several different subjects.
I'm kind of glad to tell our story, but sorry that.
Well, what we're going to do is I'm going to put this thing on the. It's going to go onto the our website. Probably not right away. There's a lot of work to do. I spent yesterday with a German pilot.
Oh.
And he was Luftwaffe pilot, 262 pilot. And at the end of the war, when his unit lost their airplanes because Galland came and took all their jets to use them in air-to-air combat, and that he ended up at the very end of the war, because he spoke English so well, they made him an MP, an American MP. He wore a Luftwaffe uniform with an MP badge on his sleeve to direct traffic.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised. I saw a lot of that.
Well, they were, they're good people. Let's face it, when it really comes down to it.
They were, there was a time when the Americans actually hired cleared German soldiers, PWs. So they did our KP duty in the mess hall.
Oh yeah, sure.
And you should have seen the faces on the. We invited the orphanage to bring in children.
And they were surprised to see Asian
Well,
faces?
Yeah, they were surprised to see German PWs in the back table and dining.
Oh, God.
And,
What happened to your parents after the war? Where did they go? They stayed in the
pretty
Seattle?
much established in Illinois.
Really? So I've always wondered about that. You go places and you see people that are, Japanese descent, and they're in, back east places in Chicago and things like that. And so that's how it happened.
Right.
The war actually moved them from the West Coast.
Scattered us all over. I would still like to find out whether that B-24 was the one that was doing cargo drop duties, or that was one of many.
Well, apparently they had 3 of them, and they used them for a lot of different things. They used them to drop. They dropped Germans behind the lines, and actually, I'm going to read about it. It's in here. It was KG-200 was the name of the group that the Germans flew these with. And KG-200 was was kind of a stealth unit, where they had a lot of other airplanes. Before the war even started, they flew airplanes all over Europe to map out all the different countries. They fly high over London, to figure out where everything was. The same old things we do today.
Well, I remember a time when my father was invited to go to the Boeing field when I think it was a Nakajima twin engine airplane came flying around